Okay, that's awesome. I think that wraps up that topic. And we kind of touched on the second topic I wanted to talk about, which was obesity, which I
Yeah,
think is probably fairly prevalent. Is this something that you see all the time in the clinic or quite often?
I see it pretty often. Where I work, I see lots of bearded dragons, and I see lots of ball pythons, and then kind of a smattering of other species. But those two seem to be obese a majority of the time that I see them.
From the naked eye, when you look at them right away, are you just able to tell instantly that these are obese animals, or is it more feeling that you can tell? Because I mean, a lot of people have obese animals without even realizing.
Yeah, I think if they are very much obese, yes, you can tell. Um, like snakes, sometimes they can be so obese that you can see the skin in between their scales because they're literally stretched out, or they'll appear very very round, sausage like, and that is an indicator. Bearded dragons, it can be a little more difficult because they're kind of flat and pancake shaped anyway when they're just hanging out on the exam table. Um, but if you palpate them, that's the biggest clue because they have these two fatty bodies inside of their coelom that they use to store their fat, and you can feel those. And in some animals, they take up the majority of the space.
Hmm. Because reptiles store fat in very different ways than mammals store fat, as far as I can tell. Or it seems it's not like a subcutaneous fat that we're used to in ourselves. So what are the differences in the way the two types of animals actually store their fat?
So a lot of species of reptiles have um, specific, they're not really organs, but specific places like those fatty bodies where the fat will go to, or they store it in their coelom, in their abdomen, and just kind of fill up the empty space with it, or it'll go around the heart or the kidneys. Mammals, you can have fat in the abdomen of a mammal, or fat around the organs, but we tend to store fat under our skin.
Right. And is it harder for maybe this question won't make sense, but I feel like for humans anyway, if you have a bunch of subcutaneous fat, you can actually burn it off relatively easy by changing your diet and whatnot. But I feel like when you have a very obese animal, it's actually or a very very obese reptile, it's hard for them to start to shed that weight, or are people just not providing enough physical activity for them or restricting their food enough?
I think it's a combination. I think diet is more important. You with mammals, for instance, for a dog, you can have an obese dog and you can exercise them all the time, but if you're overfeeding them, they're not going to outrun those excess calories. So same thing for a reptile. Good luck getting them to move around more. That's another issue I think with environmental enrichment. But even then, they're just not made to walk around and move around all the time. And so you really have to restrict their diet and be careful what you're feeding them.
Right. Yeah, and you're totally right about the sort of sausage shaped snakes. And I had sent you that Facebook post a few weeks back of somebody that had
I
one of
saw,
their
yeah.
Burmese pythons. Yeah, they had a huge, I think it was like 22 feet Burmese python. From as far as the owners were concerned, they took great care of it, and obviously they were reptile people, so they were knowledgeable. And when it passed away, they opened it up and did a little sort of post-mortem on it, and it was just full of fat bodies, and they could actually tell that it died of I think basically a heart attack.
Yeah, I think if you're not really familiar with reptiles and you haven't seen a lot of a particular species, it can be hard to tell. And I also think a lot of uh, like Instagram and Facebook and all that, a lot of the reptiles that I see people post about are overweight or not, in good condition for other reasons, but those are very popular. And so I think in our minds, the general public doesn't really have a good idea about what a healthy body weight is for a reptile.
Hmm. Oh, that totally. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with Dave Kaufman's YouTube channel, but he does these great things where he goes down to these areas like the rainforest in Brazil, or he was just in I guess, Indonesia, looking for wild reticulated pythons. And whenever he finds a wild counterpart of the animals that we have in the hobby, they look almost like ill because they're so thin
Yeah,
that, but they're not ill. They're actually a healthy weight. We're just not
right.
used to seeing that body shape. Like reticulated pythons, we just see these huge donut shaped things, but in the wild, they're actually look quite arboreal in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think I think there's a good middle ground. I mean, they are not wild; they are captive, so we don't want them to be quite so food deprived. But at the same time, we like chunkier looking animals. We think fat cats and puppies are really cute, and I think that has spilled over into reptiles. So it's really hard for somebody to look at an animal that appears too skinny, but in reality, that's better for them. And they've even done some studies on, I can't remember the particular species of boa, but they live longer when we calorie restrict them. When breeders often like to really feed them a lot because they have to get them breeding and produce as many offspring as possible, but that seems to shorten their lifespan.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That power feeding clearly does that. And Vin Rousseau, who's a pretty prominent boa breeder in the States, he was the first person that I heard talk about. He actually does not feed his boas in the winter months. He basically
Yeah.
fasts them from 60 to 90 days. And I've been doing that with my boas slowly, over the years, increasing their fast length in the wintertime. And this is their longest fast they've ever been on. They'll be fed again next week, but it'll be basically 60 days since they've eaten. And I just out of curiosity, I weighed them all last week. They have not lost a gram. They are literally the same weight they were when we started the fast. And I needed to see that because I start to feel bad. You start to anthropomorphize it in a way. You're like, oh my
Yeah.
God, like 70 days, I'd be dead. I'd be long dead. And
Yeah.
then you pull them out and you're like, wow, there's just no difference here.
Yeah, they're just not the same as mammals, and they're definitely not the same as people. And like if I'm sitting on the couch, I want to be eating something because that's what I do when I'm bored. And I think a lot of people, you do anthropomorphize and you think, well, I would be bored or I would be hungry. And also it's exciting to feed your reptiles. That's one of the few times that you can really interact with them or see them do something. And I get that. I think a lot of people enjoy that, but we do it too much. We don't realize that. And I get a lot of phone calls of people saying, my snake hasn't eaten in 2 weeks. And I have to tell them that that's not a big deal, weigh them. I always tell people, as long as they haven't lost 10% of their body weight, you're probably fine as long as all your other parameters are okay. It's okay for them to go, a couple weeks or however long without eating, as long as otherwise they're healthy.
Yeah, I mean, and even with humans, we're starting to realize that restricting some calories and doing some fasting is actually healthy for you rather than constantly having your digestive system working to digest the chips that we were eating,
Right, for sure. Yeah, I think it's healthier for everybody, but it's difficult.
Do you think that obviously ball pythons are notorious for going on food strikes? Do you think that's related to overfeeding? Obviously, there are other things that play into it, like hormones and breeding and whatnot. But I always wondered if maybe they're just, well, I guess maybe they're opportunistic feeders, so they're going to take food no matter what when they're feeding ready to eat.
I think probably it's a combination. I think we're probably overfeeding, but I also think we don't provide them, or well, let me rephrase. I think most people don't probably provide them with the environmental enrichment, with the photo period, with everything else that they need. And I don't think we even truly understand how all of those things interplay and affect their hormones and affect the enzymes and metabolism. And so I think more likely if we started changing our husbandry practices and did a better job, I think we would see less snakes, ball pythons that go on hunger strikes.
Yeah, because they are definitely the species in the hobby that gets the shortest end of the stick in terms of the care because they have become so industrialized. I mean, the tub systems have really taken over in ball pythons more than anything.
Yeah, and I think why would you want to eat if you're just constantly fed and you just sit in a tub? You have no stimulus to do anything else. I think that's probably a big part of why. There could be other reasons, and we don't know enough. I don't think we haven't done enough testing and followed ball pythons throughout their lives and done blood work and everything to really say for sure. But I do think that if we provided them with more enrichment and took better care of their needs, we wouldn't see as much.